Montana Territory, October 1883. The first snow had not yet fallen, but the wind off the Bitterroot Mountains bit through wool and bone alike when Rena Stokes stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a worn trunk, two children wrapped in hand-me-down coats, and a question she had rehearsed 100 times. Zane Thorne was already there, leaning against the corral fence outside the general store, watching the coach roll in like he always did when it came from east of Missoula. People said he was waiting for a letter that never came. Others said he was just bored. One thing everyone agreed on: Zane had refused every woman in the county. Rena saw him before he saw her. Tall, quiet, with that hard-set jaw and dark eyes that never gave away much. A man who kept to himself and liked it that way. She had heard the stories. Rancher. War veteran. Built his land with his own hands. Buried both parents before he turned 25. No one could get close. And yet he was the one she needed to speak to. She helped her son down first. Theo, 6, silent and clinging to her coat. Then her daughter, Tessa, barely 4 and already shivering. Rena adjusted the scarf around her girl's neck and set her shoulders. She walked straight toward the man who had turned away every offer of marriage, every pie on a windowsill, every smile sent his way. He looked up when she stopped in front of him. "You Zane Thorne." His eyes narrowed just a little. "I am. My name's Rena Stokes. These are my children, Theo and Tessa." She glanced down at them, then back up. "Their father left us in Kansas last winter. We nearly died. I have no kin, no money. I have nothing but what's in that trunk and 2 hands that know how to work." Zane's mouth was set in a line. He said nothing. She stepped closer. "I heard you refused every woman in the county, so I will not ask the same way they did." Her voice didn't shake. "You want a wife or just another winter alone?" The silence stretched, long enough for the wind to catch Tessa's scarf and send it fluttering. Zane caught it before it landed in the mud. He knelt down, tied it back around her neck. Tessa blinked at him, then smiled. He looked up at Rena. "You got someplace to go tonight?" She shook her head. "Then come on," Zane said, standing. "You can ride with me." They rode in his wagon, the children between them. Zane kept his eyes on the road while Rena kept hers on the horizon. The sky was turning orange behind the hills when the ranch came into view. 3 buildings, a windmill, and enough land to lose a man in. She helped unload the trunk while Zane carried Tessa inside and lit the stove. The house was plain but clean. Wood walls, braided rugs, a stone hearth already warming the kitchen. "You can have the room at the back," he said. "The children can sleep there with you." She nodded. "Thank you. I will not marry you just because you asked." "I did not ask," she said, meeting his eyes. "I gave you a choice." Zane stared at her for a long moment. Then he gave one slow nod and left the room. That night, Rena tucked the children into a bed that smelled of cedar and fresh wool. She sat by the window long after they fell asleep, watching the snow start to fall late but heavy. She did not cry. She did not wonder if she had made the right choice. All that mattered was that her children were warm and safe. The next morning she was up before the sun. She boiled coffee, fried salt pork, and stacked kindling on the porch. Zane came in from the barn, his coat dusted with white, and paused at the door when he saw her. "You do not have to cook." "I know," she said. "But I will." He sat across from her at the table. Steam rose between them. His eyes were tired but not cold. "Most women want flowers and letters," he said. "I want a roof, food for my children, and a man who does not lie or leave." Zane looked at her, really looked for the first time. "That I can give." Days passed. Then weeks. Rena fixed the roof where it leaked. She repaired the fence when the wind took it down. She taught the children their letters by the fire and made stew from what Zane brought back from his hunts. And slowly, the quiet between them changed. He started sitting with her at night, not speaking much, but staying close. He let Theo follow him out to the barn, showed him how to hold a hammer, how to tell when a horse was sick. Tessa picked wildflowers and left them on Zane's chair without saying a word. One night, after the children were asleep, Rena stepped out onto the porch and found Zane already there. He handed her a mug of coffee. "You work harder than anyone I have known," he said. She smiled a little. "So do you." He looked out at the snow-covered fields. "Truth is, I was not waiting on a letter. I just did not think I could trust anyone again." And now, his voice was low. "Now I do not want you to leave." Rena set the mug down. "Then say what you mean." Zane turned to her. "I want you to stay as my wife, not just for the children, not for the work, for me." Her breath caught. "I know I am not easy," he said, "but I care for you." Rena stepped closer, touched his coat sleeve. "I care for you too, Zane." He reached for her hand, held it, and in the cold wind of a Montana night something steady and warm took root. Not rushed, not forced, just real. Earned. They would not sleep alone that winter. They would not be alone again. By late November, the snow stayed. It lay in quiet folds over the hills, softened the outlines of the barn, and turned the fence line to a pale ribbon that stretched into the trees. Inside the house, the air held the scent of dry wood, and something warming on the stove, parsnips and beans, simmered with marrowbone. Rena stood at the table, sleeves rolled, shaping dough between her fingers while Theo sorted nails in the corner. Tessa sat on a stool by the hearth, humming to a cloth doll Zane had carved her from cottonwood. The house had grown louder with the children's voices, but it was a good noise, the kind that filled in the silences without crowding them. Zane came in from the shed, arms dusted with sawdust, his hat damp from where the snow had melted against it. He hung it by the door and leaned down to tap Theo's shoulder. "You think you're ready to help with the bridals come morning?" he asked. Theo nodded, then hesitated. "If I do it wrong, will the horse throw me?" Zane crouched beside him. "Not if I'm there, and I will be." Theo's eyes lit, shoulders squaring. Zane gave a single nod, then stood. Rena watched that quiet exchange, the way her son leaned into the confidence given him. After supper, when the children had taken their bowls to the wash basin and she'd wiped the flour from her palms, Rena stepped out to the porch where Zane had gone. The night was thick with cold, stars sharp as needles. He didn't look over when she joined him, just passed her a mug of warmed cider. "I saw a bear's trail up past the creek," he said. "Big one, fresh, might come down for chickens if it gets too hungry. I'll keep the coop latched tight." He took a sip, then glanced at her. "I was thinking about that roof on the bunkhouse. If we patched it before the thaw, I could use it come spring, maybe for extra feed, or tools." She leaned her hip against the porch rail. "Or a place to store dried herbs. I've been gathering wild chamomile and yarrow. Could hang them from the beams if you don't mind." "I don't." She looked out at the dark. "You always plan ahead, even when you weren't sure who'd be here with you." "Habit." They stood quiet a while longer, their breath clouding the air. "I never asked what made you come this far," he said finally. "Why Montana? Why me?" She didn't answer at once. "Because Kansas was dying behind me, and I needed to find a place that didn't expect me to smile just to be fed. I asked about men who kept to themselves." "Your name came up more than once." He turned toward her. "And you thought that meant I'd say yes?" "No, I thought it meant you'd say what you meant. That's rarer than kindness." He stared at her, his face unreadable in the starlight. "Most things I've built," he said, "I built alone. I never thought I'd want someone else's hand in it. And now," his answer was quiet, "now I can't imagine yours not there." She didn't reach for him. She didn't need to. Inside, the fire snapped. Tessa's laughter drifted through the window as Theo whispered something to make her giggle. Rena's chest ached in that way it did when something hard inside softened just enough to let light through. "The Reverend passes through in December," she said, not looking at him. "If you still mean what you said." "I do." She nodded once, then stepped back inside, leaving the door open behind her. Zane followed. The snow had crusted thick by the time the Reverend's sleigh appeared on the road past the east ridge, runners whispering across the frozen topsoil. Rena stood near the barn, stacking the last of the split wood into the lean-to, and watched the gray horse pull steady through the drifts. Zane emerged from the paddock, brushing hay from his sleeves, and met her eyes without a word. He walked with her to the house. Neither spoke as they stepped inside, boots thudding hollow on the floorboards. Theo glanced up from the table, where he was threading a length of twine through a pine cone. Tessa dozed on a wool blanket by the hearth, hand curled around the doll Zane had carved. Rena brushed the damp from her skirt. "Do you want them there?" Zane nodded once. "They're part of it." The Reverend arrived just after mid-morning, red-cheeked and wind-whipped, his Bible wrapped in oilcloth. He warmed his hands over the stove while Rena fetched a basin and set out coffee. Zane stood near the window, arms crossed, not stiff but watchful. The words were spoken plain. No lace, no music, no ring. Just hands joined tight and a promise carried without ceremony. Theo watched with wide eyes. Tessa, roused by the Reverend's voice, clambered into Rena's arms and stayed there as the last words were said. After the sleigh disappeared into the tree line again, Rena sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced her boots. The children were in their room, whispering beneath quilts, their laughter muffled and light. Zane leaned in the doorway. "I never thought I'd marry in the same room I built with my father." She peeled off her stockings, toes aching from the cold. "Does it feel strange?" He stepped inside. "Only that it feels like it should have happened sooner." She drew her knees up beneath her shift. "I never imagined marrying someone I barely knew, but it doesn't feel like I don't know you." Zane sat beside her, hands resting on his thighs. "I used to think people learned each other through talk. But you came here and just did, like you understood the shape of the place before it changed you." She looked at him, the firelight casting shadows along his cheek. "You were already softened, you just didn't want anyone to see." His jaw tightened, not with resistance but memory. "I watched my mother get quieter each winter. By the end, she barely spoke. I thought it was just what happened to folks out here." Renner reached for his hand, palm rough and familiar now. "You don't have to hold it all alone anymore." He turned that hand over, laced their fingers. "I won't." They lay down side by side, boots and coats shed, not touching more than hands. It was not a night of urgency, but of quiet arrival. He watched her breathe until her eyes closed, then closed his own. The wind tapped against the window pane, but the house held steady. In the days that followed, their rhythms bent gently to one another. She began keeping a small ledger tucked near the stovepipe, marking what was planted and what had been used. Zane started leaving a second mug beside hers each morning without asking if she wanted more. She always did. One afternoon, Rena stepped out to the barn and found the ladder missing. She followed the scrape of wood to the bunkhouse, where Zane was up on the rafters, hammering in new slats. A coil of rope hung from his belt and sawdust clung to his collar. "You're closing it in," he glanced down. "You said you needed a place for drying herbs." She crossed her arms. "I didn't expect you to remember." He gave a small shrug and returned to the nails. "You said it. That was enough." She watched him work a while, then leaned against the doorframe. "You ever think about what comes next?" His voice carried down without pause. "Spring calves, mending the north fence, teaching Theo to ride proper." "I meant further." He looked down at her then, eyes darker than the rafters above. "You mean more children?" She didn't answer, only watched. I never thought I'd want that again, he said. But lately, I've been thinking about what it would feel like to carry someone in from the cold and know they were meant to be here. Rena stepped forward, boots crunching over straw. Then we'll let time decide. Zane climbed down, slow and sure, the ladder creaking beneath him. When he reached her, he didn't speak, just touched her face with one calloused hand, thumb brushing beneath her cheekbone. She leaned into it, eyes steady. They stood in the half-light of the open door, not needing more than what passed between them. The snow would thaw come March. The world would shift. But the shape of them, the way they moved together without rush or demand, was already settled, and neither one would face another winter alone. The cold loosened its grip come early March, though the wind still carried the edge of winter. The snow had begun to shrink back from the fence lines, leaving behind patches of brown earth and flattened grass. Thin, stubborn shoots of green pushed up along the margins of the barn, where sun touched the soil longest. That was when Zane taught Theo to saddle the mare on his own, while Rena mended the torn hem of her only good dress with new thread she'd traded for at the store. One morning, Zane returned from checking the upper pasture with a splinter lodged deep in his palm. He sat at the table while Rena worked it out with the point of a needle, her fingers steady despite the grit under his skin. "You ever think about finishing that line of fence back behind the bluff?" she asked, without lifting her eyes. "You want to clear more land. I want the bluff to keep the children from wandering too close. Theo's getting faster. And Tessa, it doesn't take much for her to go chasing after something shiny." He glanced toward the back window. "I'll need more posts hauled up from the lower end. I can haul them." Zane's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "I know you can." That same afternoon, Rena found a worn cedar box tucked behind the flour sack in the pantry. Inside were 3 letters, folded neat, all addressed to a Thorn in Missouri. She didn't open them. She set the box on the kitchen shelf and waited until he came in from the barn, shirt damp at the collar from work. "I moved your letters," she said as he passed the basin to wash. "Which ones?" "The ones you keep behind the flour." His hand stilled in the water. "Only opened one." "Years ago. You want me to leave them where they were. They aren't mine anymore." She dried her hands on her apron. "They're part of you. I don't want them to be." Rena didn't press. She returned the box to its place before nightfall. Later, with the children asleep and the fire burning low, Zane sat on the floor against the hearth, his knees drawn up, boots off. Rena worked a comb through Tessa's doll's hair, smoothing out the rough yarn strands. "She was my brother's wife," he said, voice low. "The one who wrote. He died during the war. She wrote after, said she didn't know what to do without him. I never answered." Rena set the doll aside. "Why not?" "Because I didn't know what to say to someone who'd lost what I never had." She folded her hands in her lap. "You do now." He looked at her, the fire catching the flecks of gray at his temples. "I do." Spring crept in slow but steady. The hens laid more regular. Tessa ran barefoot again, her legs pink with the cold but eager. Theo, taller than when they'd arrived, now carried a slingshot tucked into his belt and watched the creek for tracks. Rena began laying out rows in the garden, marking off beets and carrots with lengths of twine. Zane added a second trough to the well to make watering easier. They worked without needing to speak much, but when they did, the words came easy. One night, after the children had gone to bed with their hair still damp from washing, Zane brought in a bundle of willow switches and a roll of twine. "What's that for?" Rena asked, folding the last of the linens. "Thought we'd build Tessa a swing." She paused. "She'll fall off. Then we'll tie a second rope, keep her steady." Rena stepped closer. "You think of things like that more than you let on." "I think of you in every part of it." She touched his chest, fingers resting over the place his heart beat slow and sure. "I know." He leaned down, breath warm against her ear. "I never thought peace would feel like this." Rena looked up at him, her voice quiet. "It's not peace if it's only quiet. It's peace because you're not alone in it." Zane lifted her hand, pressed it to his lips. "Then I'll keep it." That night they lay with the window cracked open, the air fresh with thawed earth and new sap. No words passed between them. They didn't need to. The warmth between them, the space they chose to fill with each other's breath, was louder than anything they might have said. In the dark, Renner reached for his hand and found it waiting. The house, once built for one, now held 4 lives, steady as the ridge behind it. The wind moved through the trees, and the quiet that followed was full. By late April, the soil turned warm beneath Rena's fingers. She spent long hours bent over the garden rows, coaxing shape and order into the thawed ground. Her hands, once cracked from cold, had regained strength and steadiness. Tessa dug beside her with a wooden spoon, declaring every worm a treasure. From the barn, the sound of Theo calling to the gelding, his voice confident, no longer tentative, carried across the yard. Zane had taken to rising before dawn, not out of habit now, but to steal time. He'd returned from the far paddock with mud on his boots and a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, sometimes carrying a goose egg or a handful of early shoots from the creek bend. He'd leave them on the kitchen table without a word. Rena never asked where he'd gone. She already knew. One afternoon, as she washed linens in the creek, Theo came running, breathless and flushed. "Ma, there's a man at the fence. Says he's looking for Mr. Thorne." Rena straightened, wrung the water from her apron, and followed him up the hill. The man stood beside a bay gelding, coat too fine for this stretch of country, jaw shaved clean. Zane stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Zane Thorne," the man called. Zane didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed as he took the man in. "You're a long way from town." "I came from Helena. Name's Everett Cotter. I'm with the land office." Zane didn't blink. "I paid my taxes in February." "That you did. But this isn't about money. There's talk of building a rail spur through the west stretch. Surveyors say the valley's clean enough for a pass. They're buying parcels outright." Rena moved to stand beside Zane. "The bluff, the whole north slope, might be a year off yet, but they're planning. Just wanted to give you the courtesy of knowing." Zane didn't move. "I'm not selling." "I figured you'd say that." Cotter nodded, tipping his hat. Still had to ask. Once the man rode off, Renner reached for Zane's arm. "That slope's where the swing will go." "I know." She studied his face. "You worried?" "No, I built this place to last. Not to sell." That evening he pulled a crate from beneath the bed. Inside were ledgers, folded maps, and a hand-drawn sketch of the property lines, marked in pencil with notations in his father's handwriting. He spread them on the kitchen table. Rena traced the lines with her finger. "What'll we do if they come pushing harder?" "We don't bend." She looked up at him. "You still want to stay here?" "I want to grow old where I know the ground by name." She folded the map and tucked it back into the crate. "Then we'll hold it together." Later, she found Theo sitting at the edge of the meadow, legs dangling over the ditch. He didn't look up when she sat beside him. "You worried about that man." He picked at a blade of grass. "He talked like he could take it, just like that. He can't." "Not without our say." Theo nodded, slow. "Pa said the land knows who belongs." Renner reached over and ruffled his hair. "He's right." Come May, the swing was hung from the cottonwood tree at the bluff's edge. Zane tied the ropes tight, then stepped back while Tessa climbed in, her legs kicking the air. Theo pushed her gently, careful and proud. Rena stood a few paces back, arms folded, watching them. Zane came to her side, brushing sawdust from her shoulder. "You ever get tired?" he asked. Not of this. He tilted his head. I've been thinking about the back field. It's good soil. Might take a second plow team, but we could double the yield. She smiled at that. Planning for more mouths, maybe. She turned toward him, eyes warm. Then we'd best start early. That night, she stitched a new quilt by lamplight while Zane carved a rail hook for her drying herbs. They didn't speak much, but when their eyes met, the quiet that passed between them held all the weight of what neither needed to say. In the weeks that followed, the garden thickened with greens. Theo rode bareback through the pasture, Tessa trailing behind on a pony Zane had bartered for with a neighbor's extra heifer. Rena's belly began to swell just enough that her skirts needed letting out. Zane, without comment, added a cushion to her chair and a second latch to the door, as if the world might try to take what they'd made one morning. As she sat on the porch shelling peas, Zane came to stand behind her, arms loose around her shoulders. This house feels full. She leaned back against him. It is. He kissed her hair, slow and certain. I used to think love was something loud, something that burned. And now I know it's what stays. What shows up every morning and doesn't leave. She set the pea pod down, turning in his arms. You came when I asked. I stayed because I wanted to. She touched her hand to his chest. And I did too. They stood that way until Tessa's laughter rang out from the garden, Theo running after her with a straw hat in hand. The sun rose higher, warm and golden, and the house behind them stood quiet and strong. They never left the land. Not for railroads, not for offers written in ink by men who didn't know the name of the creek that wound behind the bluff. They raised their children with calloused hands and soft steadiness, and when the next winter came, the fire never once went out. Years later, with Gray in her braid and Zane's gait slowed by time, Rena still rose early to boil coffee. He still left a second mug beside hers. And most mornings, they watched the sun climb over the ridge, fingers laced together, the silence between them full of everything they'd built. And nothing was ever taken from them again.